Welcome, fans, to a special live edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Pro Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, and I'm really pleased tonight to have on a man who has so many good stories and experiences from perhaps one of the most successful and still to this day valid forms of professional wrestling, eras of professional wrestling. He is from the legendary Anderson wrestling family. He is the son of Gene Anderson, and we're talking Ole Anderson in the family, Lars in the family. But he is a man who's done so much in this business and has a great deal of insights to share. And I would be talking about none other than Brad Anderson. Brad, welcome to the Cheap Heat Productions podcast.
Thank you very much, Jack. I wish I could have met your partner for this one, but I understand he's had some death in his family. My apologies and sincerity go out to that, but maybe one day down the road we can do this again and talk to him also. But thank you again for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. And he, Morris is off tonight due to that reason, but we will definitely look at that in the future. But in terms of the mythology of professional wrestling families, there are few that really reach that level of the Anderson family, beginning with your dad and Lars, and then transitioning to Ole. And I wanted the fans usually would like to know, to start off with, what was that like growing up in that household?
I mean, because I grew up in it, and from the day one, my dad, me being alive, he had already established himself as a wrestler. I just didn't know what a real family was like, I guess. So I thought that was normal. I never met Lars until I I inducted him to the Hall of Fame for Greg Price would run the Fan Fest down in Charlotte. Never met him until that day. They used me. I guess I was the closest person that was related to him. Not really, but really. And I had never met him before. But yeah, I knew Ole well growing up. His boys, he had 7 kids. We all played together. But I just didn't think, looking back now, what a family. Yeah, it was really different. I just didn't know any better back then. It was I hear all these stories, and my dad would come in and he would talk to me all the time and tell me stuff. And that might be why I'm a little bit twisted, but I mean, it's a wrestling business. So, some guy comes home from the bank and tells this kid about they made a great transaction today. And my dad comes home and tells me about how much heat they got. And Ole almost got stabbed on the way back to the dressing room. That seemed more normal to me to a point, I didn't know any different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here's a picture you shared. Not many folks can say they've experienced Ole at. Is that a birthday party of yours or some other celebration?
That was my birthday party. And you can see Ole in the back. He's probably miserable. I can't. I mean, he was always miserable unless he was, telling you about how bad somebody else couldn't work. But yeah, that's him in the background. That's me. That's mostly his family that's there. Probably my sisters in that picture. But Ole eventually ended up having 7 kids. And I think I'd mentioned before, they were all in alphabetical order, except for the first 2. You had Bryant, which was the first. You had Aaron, Christian, Dana, Ethan, and Gail. And so it was like, I don't know how that happened, but yeah, he had a lot of kids. And yeah, so we played together, and I knew he wasn't a real uncle, but he was the closest uncle I had because I didn't have close family back then. It was just separated. From my mom was from Calgary, where my dad met her when he first broke into the business, and my dad's from Minnesota. So never, it was just distant. So.
In terms of Ole, and we'll jump around a bit here on the timeline, I found an interesting story that I'm going to ask you to comment on. But globally speaking, in terms of your dad's relationship with Ole, I was fortunate enough to get a copy of Ole's book, read it, had nothing but super positive feedback for your dad. He said he was quiet a lot, but what from your recollection relationship, what was that relationship like? I know they were co-workers and had a professional situation. They were drawing a whole ton of money for a long time as the Wrecking Crew, one of the most successful tag teams in Georgia history. But in those moments, what was that relationship like?
If you read that book, that's the most, and I might be partial, but that's like, besides that one and the Bret Hart book that he wrote, and Roddy Piper's book, but the book Ole wrote was one of the closest of the top three of being honest. And because I remember in there, Ole said something about my dad was the most loyal person he had ever met, I think is the quote that he said. Yes. And Dad would constantly tell me stuff, and usually it was Ole's opinion is what he was telling me. Oh, you don't do this. My dad didn't work out. Ole did. He was, but he constantly, Ole said to do this. Oh, it was almost like, obviously my dad was a wonderful, great worker, but Ole was his idol. I mean, I can say that he loved him to death. He's like, Ole doesn't drink beer. Ole, you don't do these things because Ole said so. And but yeah, that was my memories. Like a lot of the stuff my dad preached to me came through Ole's opinions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that book is a great, if you want to understand who Ole Anderson, the person is, that's a great book.
Yeah, and also in terms of the business end of it and his insights in promoting and also the product itself and how to present it. And I mean, everything's out the window now. We've got these. I don't know if you saw those. This is one of the questions I was going to ask you as an old school guy. But did you see in the pay-per-view for AEW? On the weekend, they had these social media, quote unquote, influencer individuals, the Costco guys and the two kids in a match and in a featured position. And, it drew eyeballs, but personally, as an old school fan, it's very difficult for me to watch I don't know if you've seen that, but that similar sort of thing. What's your take on that? I know Ole would be. That's actually one of the things I was thinking when I was watching it was Ole would probably have a heart attack.
Yeah, I did see a little bit of that. My only information or views of AEW and WWE actually come through TikTok, and I'm sorry, I'm a bad scroller. When I wake up in the morning, I get up early. I did see that. I don't know what the deal was with the kid that won whatever the match is, but I did read the comments and they were saying this is so like the end of the WCW days, like they were just reaching for anything to get views. I can't watch any of the shows anymore, even though it's called professional wrestling. I can't, like, it's not what we did. It's two different things. I heard someone say one of the last times I worked was like 2019. They said a wrestler from the 80s and 90s couldn't make it today, but a wrestler from today couldn't make it in the 80s and 90s. It's just, you're comparing apples to oranges, and there's a lot of guys making money. That's great. I just can't watch it and put it in my mind the same thing, that this is what my dad taught me. This is what the people did before him. This is what I tried to do. So I can't blame people for loving the new product, but I can't say I don't want to get in that argument of, okay, well, this just isn't what wrestling was, because that's what they only know now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's ironic. And again, their target demo is not yourself and myself. So you put that lens on it, you can understand it. But I think I don't want to say, well, I will say it's disrespectful to the people like your dad and Ole that built that business when they were making a lot of money then too. and yet we're trying to present it as a legitimate sport. And it seems in the last few years, with the advent of social media, they're making a lot of money. They're getting, well, not AEW, but WWE are getting, pretty substantial ratings. But yet you're right. It's almost where to the point where the ring is a distraction from the all the other antics. Do you think, before I go to this example, do you think there's room for a more traditional, old school product on a notwithstanding territories like Great North Wrestling that we have here, very traditional old school product, but we're not a national company. Do you think there's a room for a WCW, a true WCW anecdote or counterpart to AEW and WWE with a more traditional presentation, or is that ship sailed?
I would love for that to be. I got a cat getting ready to jump into the screen here. I wish that was the case. The last time I watched wrestling with my son, Gunther, I think, is a WWE wrestler, and that was the closest to an old school wrestler that I was like, man, I like this guy's style. They're not going to push it though, because people, even when I was in wrestling, when you had the WCW and WWE battles, Vince said, I don't care about wrestling. He wanted views and just, showmanship. He did not care about wrestling. So they're not going to, I don't think I don't know, because the way the fans are so preconditioned now it's like, it started in the late 90s where these guys, they go out to a match and all it is spots. They have all their spots set up. Back in the day when I was wrestling, and what I was taught is you do a spot when you controlled the people, and it was very empowering. Like, you grab a hold and you look at that first person in the front row, and your baby face starts to get up, you step on his ankle, just a little stuff that makes heat. And then you put a spot in. And Cornette said this best: there's so many spots happening in a match that people don't even know how to react. It's just like, oh yeah, and then before they can react to that spot, there's somebody jumping off a friggin' ladder. Or doing some gymnastic spot. So they don't listen to the people, and there's no way they can, because they already have every spot set up. The match is set up. We go out to a match and we didn't know what was going to happen. We knew the finish, but we didn't know XYZ spot. We called it and listened to it by the fans. And I don't mean this to sound, but we loved that we controlled the crowd. Can't say I did, but your big heels did. They controlled the crowd. Ole got stabbed. That's heat, coming back from the. So I wish there was a market for it. I personally, I can't see it happening, but I wish there was. Yes.
Well, I think it boils down. I think in our previous discussion, you mentioned this. There's no psychology anymore. It's spot fest and way too fast for the fans to react, even if they wanted to.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what that's exactly. They don't, and I'm not going to bullshit. They do some impressive stuff. I don't call it wrestling. It's highly athletic. It's highly gymnastic. I couldn't do it, but then again, they couldn't go out there, in the 90s and 80s and control a match and just listen to people and call spots, and get the heat in, or get the hot tag in. I haven't seen a hot tag. You hear hot tag. People don't even know what a hot tag is anymore. Mm-hmm. So I wish there was. So
the story that I came across, and I'll just read it to you to see if your dad ever mentioned it or if you're familiar with it generally. It was on the Ring the Damn Bell website, which is a pretty cool website for old school fans. And it says, early in Barry Windham's career, he was teaming with his father, Black Jack Mulligan, against a team of the Andersons of Gene and Ole, respectively. And during this contest, Ole was said to go into business for himself and started working stiff on the young Windham. Mulligan noticed his son getting worked over by Ole and ran into the ring tagged and started throwing real punches at Ole. Can you talk about that and any knowledge you have of the animosity between Ole and Blackjack? Because they finish here, this I find kind of questionable, saying after pummeling Anderson, Mulligan, Wyndham, and Ole's partner Gene all walked out of the ring back to the dressing room, leaving Ole alone and embarrassed inside the ring.
I've never heard of that. I'm not going to say it's not true. I've never heard of that. The only time, and I think it was actually in Ole's book where he taught, I didn't know that, like, my dad used to take me out of Blackjack's place. I went to football camp with Barry Windham and Kendall Windham at Davidson Unifor College back then. And we'd go fishing at Blackjack's place. So, you know, a lot of times I know my dad would get guilty by association because he was so loyal to Ole. So you'd think if Blackjack had heat with Ole, he might have heat. I don't know. But I did remember reading in the book something about where Ole and Blackjack got into it, but it was behind the scenes. And I think I can't remember. I don't want to, maybe Blackjack slapped him or something. I can't remember exactly. But that was the only time I knew of heat between Ole and Blackjack. I know in the book it seemed like Ole didn't have his most favorable opinions of Blackjack by the way he reacted at times. But yeah, I never heard that one at all. But again, like I said, I mean, I was friends with Kendall and Blackjack. We'd go fishing out, or excuse me, Barry. We'd go fishing out at Blackjack's place. I remember he threw corn in the pond. He's like, "Look at all these biggest brims I ever caught in my life." I mean, they were humongous, but he'd been feeding them corn. But yeah, I don't know that. I never heard that before.
Yeah, I think the only confirmed situation physically with Ole and Blackjack was at the power plant after Ole had been kind of squeezed out and was there as a trainer, and there was some word said or something, and Blackjack punched him, and supposedly it took away some of Ole's aura as a tough guy, and then Bischoff fired him.
That might be what I remember reading, but you know, the thing is like, I would never put my kid in the ring who's green. If, you know, I had a son, he wanted to get into wrestling. And it just didn't work out with the way things are. But anyway, if it was the 1980s, I would never put my green kid in the ring with Ole and Gene Anderson. I'm sorry. I wouldn't do it because it would be hard to, I mean, you know how they work. And like, I would look at it and I'm like, I can't watch my kid get, you know, even though it's a work, they beat the shit out of you, you know? Mm-hmm. And I could see it easily getting, you know, personal, like, oh, they're doing too much because he doesn't like me or whatever. But I couldn't imagine if I put my kid in the ring with two guys, that I would make sure it was going to be a simple match and there was going to be no reason to be heat. So that would be my only answer also to that.
Yeah. And it didn't seem to be plausible given, you know, what Ole wrote about your dad. Like, it seemed like they were in some really significant situations in terms of crowds wanting to riot and et cetera. And they always left at the same time. I couldn't see your dad just walking out on Ole.
Well, you know, I remember the best things. I remember him teaching me the best heat you get is selling on your way back from the ring after you just got your hand raised. Today, you see, they get their hand raised and they don't sell shit, you know. Back then, you know, Ole and Dad, they barely would. They'd do something dirty, you know, and give them a hook, boom, get the crowd hot, and 1, 2, 3, and they're, you know, either my dad's helping Ole out of the ring or Ole's helping my dad, and one of them can barely walk. And that just makes the people even mad. They're like, you motherfucker, you could have never done that had you not cheated. And so people don't even understand what heat is today because they get heat, get a fuck finish, and then they pop up and, you know, walk back, put their belt over their arms. And man, heat is heat. You don't pop it, you know, it's sell your ass off, make them stay mad at you, you know? So, that's some old school wisdom there. That's not mine, but that's old school wisdom there.
Yeah, and it's a shame because the psychology and those fine details of which, the Wrecking Crew did it uh, as good or better than anybody. They set the template in a lot of ways for tag team wrestling, which is another lost art. It built interest in the product and really contributed to an emotional investment of the fans into the product, and that seems to be completely out the window at all, and that's why people consume it, I guess, casually.
Yeah, I don't. I've worked with people and they come and talk to me about they love wrestling today, and I'm like, okay, and they try to tell me this, and they still try to come to from the point of, yeah, I know all that, and you've heard that your whole life. If you hear it still, if you're a wrestling fan, people say, well, yeah, I know that's a bunch of BS, but this was real or whatever. And what the stuff they say is real today, I would go back and look for, and I was like, no, man, I'm glad you have an interest in wrestling, but you never understood what was real.
Yeah, not exactly shades of Johnny Valentine when he said that, correct?
My dad taught me, I might have said this the last time we spoke, and I had old VCR cassettes of Johnny Valentine, but you could have watched one and they would have all been the same. He would walk out of the dressing room and say nothing, just walk slowly, look at the people, and they would want to rip his head out. That's a funny because when I looked up the word, I remember the word cheap heat was not a good word back in the day.
Nope.
So when I spoke to you and you were telling me about that, and I mean, I know, again, no gimmicks guy. Everybody uses kayfabe words and stuff. That no disrespect. I don't. But it's funny. It's like, but back in the day, one of the worst things you do as a heel is have cheap heat. You don't walk out there and do Johnny Valentine if you want cheap heat, because you have no heat. You look at the fat girl in the front row and say, hey, you fat pig, or, that's cheap heat. Getting your heat in the ring or just presenting yourself in a way that if fans are out there listening right now, look up Johnny Valentine on YouTube. I mean, he was amazing prior to obviously he was paralyzed in the plane crash, but he could just walk out there and say nothing and take 8 minutes to do it and ready to rip his head off,
And less being more. That also seems to be a bygone, or a product of a bygone era as well.
Yeah, you look at it now. You got it's great. It's entertaining. You got fireworks blowing up. You got people shooting out of holes in the state. There's a lot, So exactly, I agree with you. Less is more sometimes. Again, getting back to the earlier question, I don't think people could accept that. I couldn't imagine a Johnny Valentine character walking out and just walking they would be like, it'd be boring, And back in the day, we loved it. Go ahead and say boring. Guess what? Now I got a headlock and I'm going to really bored. Okay. Until all of you shut up. That was different with house shows. Now you have live TV. You can't do that. I understand. But yeah, when we heard boring back in the day, guess what? I control this ring right now. I being the heel. And you can be as bored as you want to, because I'll sit here all night in a headlock until all of you shut up. And that gets it matter, because now I'm still in control, so, and again, this is being a heel, not me and my power to call a match, but that was what I was taught.
Dictating the pace, correct. I wanted to get you, and this is something that I think we're gonna discuss, but kind of ran out of time, and that's the infamous tryouts that your dad and Ole had, and I think that paints kind of a picture of just how different and difficult it was to get into the business back in that era, as opposed to today when you can join a school and et cetera, et cetera. But can you talk about that and some of the pain and agony and stretching that went on in those endeavors?
Absolutely. That's one of when I think of professional wrestling, that's one of my biggest memories, because I grew up, that was my first introduction to the guys, mostly because Dad had wrestling tryouts. This was back when they would have them at the Charlotte Coliseum, which is an arena now or whatever. But I'd start going down there at 8 years old or something with him, and he would always have shooters there. And he basically, long story short, they would physically just run you to death, physically make you do so many push-ups, squats, run the stairs of the Coliseum, get you to the point where you could not even walk into the ring, let alone wrestle. And I remember hearing this, and I'm a kid. I'm running around the Charlotte Coliseum exploring stuff and looking down. I'm up on the catwalk on top of the Coliseum looking down, hearing a man squeal. These were the original ones. And I remember I would be in the wrestling office with Dad, and they would call on the phone. He's like, okay, show up on Saturday. Make sure you're in fucking shape. He at least told them that, because they needed to be in shape. I had no idea. I never had an idea of being in shape like that. And I know they did not. In the early years, like he would have his shooters there, but you would have top name guys because it was such a big thing. It was like they wanted to see these guys who thought they were wrestlers get stretched. And I mean, I'd hear them squealing, and I mean, I was there. I don't remember it all happening. The incident where the guy came out with pack up packs and said to Ole that he's ready to be a wrestler and he knows how to get blood. And like literally Ole put his finger in his eye and told him if he ever came back, and the guy's screaming. I've heard that story a million times. Now, the ones that I know I was part of, I was 14 years old. And I was in Raleigh at Dorton Arena, and some dude showed up and wanted to be a wrestler. And my dad had made me wrestle forever. I didn't love it when I was a kid. And this guy was a Pan American champion, but they made him run everything, do it the same. It was just one guy. And I remember thinking, I'm 14 years old. This is a grown man. Well, he couldn't even get to the ropes by the time he got there. And I'm just putting little amateur shoot moves on him and stuff like that. Well, then you had Dad and Nelson started their wrestling school, and that was where I really started seeing some stretching going on. That was crazy. And so like he would have, Gary Corton, the Italian Stallion. He always had the most recent shooters, and a lot of them weren't on top, and they needed some extra money. Dad would throw on money because it was like $200 or $250 to try out. And I remember the early years thinking, like, he's just beating these guys up to take their money. And so I remember Dad always said, you got to protect the business, kid. You don't understand. So when it came around for Nelson's school, they actually had a place they could train wrestlers. So yes, they were going to train wrestlers, but they were also going to get rid of the garbage. And I remember, like, I would get in there. I have to say that I wrote this down. I don't want this to get passed up. These were some of the wrestlers that went through Dad's wrestling school with Nelson Royal: Joe Cruz, Curtis Thompson, Chip the Firebreaker, Tommy Angel, Trent Knight, David Isley, Ken Shamrock, Rusty Riddle, L.A. Stevens, Ricky Nelson, who was the least of my favorite people, but he went through that. I mean, there's a list it's amazing. But
solid talents. Notwithstanding Ken Shamrock, some really Tommy Angel's a great guy.
Yes. Actually, Johnny Ace even came through there before. Like he wasn't trained there, but they wanted him to polish up some when he first started. This was 86-ish. I could go on with that list, but I think the best story from Dad's wrestling school, and I know Al Snow, I mentioned that to you before, he had talked about it, where Dad literally bit him in his back. I mean, I couldn't understand that stuff back then. It's still hard to understand now, but I would be in the ring with some of these guys at 16 years old and they're 22, but they can barely walk. And, I just put little hooks on them like a shooter. I'm not trying to choke them out or hurt them. And Dad's out there like, crossface him, break his fucking nose. They're like, choke him out, put the sugar on him, which the sugar was a famous move back then. I never really learned how to do it because I didn't like choking somebody out. I'm sorry. But the best story ever, though, was they had a tryout. And this one, Dad hated drugs. He never really drank ever. I never remember seeing alcohol in the house. And he really hated drugs. So this guy, after he did finish the whole tryout, and it was time to go in the ring, and he says, hell yeah, I'm going to have a cocaine party for everybody after this tryout. That was my dad at this point was not in good health. He was wearing flip flops and like the old biker, the bike coaches shorts, the polyester shorts that your coach would have in high school. He's got some old white t-shirt. He's so mad now. He's climbing in the ring. He doesn't even, his flip flop falls off. He still has one on. I want to say George South's book, he talked about this in there because he was there also. So it can be verified. Dad took this guy and beat the shit. He literally bashed his face into the mat saying, you want to do some cocaine now, you motherfucker? You want to be a fucking wrestler? And like they literally left that blood spot in the ring. I don't know, for a year or two before they clean. I mean, as it was like a monument of, okay, you want to come here and be a wrestler? This is what it's going to look like if you don't know how to act. So that was one of the best stories. I remember there were so many, though. It was so brutal. I honestly didn't like it because I'm sorry. I mean, I understand their way of protecting the business, but sometimes it also felt like they had fun just beating people up. And outside, he's like, these guys, these aren't guys who work a 40-hour a week job. They would have been in prison probably. Not that they were criminals, just because their mentality, they couldn't fit into society. Roddy Piper. Can you imagine going to a corporate bank and seeing Roddy? No, anybody with a personality. I mean, they fell into the spots they needed to be in their life. And yeah, it's a crazy, but business that's exactly what it was, though, is most of these guys couldn't fit in a regular world, and this is what was made them their money, and they were going to protect it with everything.
Well, and that's a very, very salient point that I wanted to ask you about. Where do you think, and in terms of your dad's operation, obviously that clown that said that there's going to be a cocaine party or whatever, he got what was coming to him. But we've heard stories about particularly, and I confuse Bob Roop with Bob Sweetan a lot, but he was Bob was the shooter for Eddie Graham in Florida, and they had tryouts too, and it seemed like they would just brutalize people because they under the guise of protecting the business, they enjoyed it. They were sadistic. And after the guy was screaming, Graham would come in and put some more punishment on the guy. So in where in the old school sense did that line fall between, the cocky guys that thought that they were the best athletes and that they were going to prove that wrestling was bullshit, and the guys that had potential, that could be perhaps something? I know Ole said that a lot. He would see something in somebody, but when your dad did his camps or his tryouts, was it that sort of an atmosphere that, we're going to protect the business and that's going to involve a whole lot of pain and agony and blues, or was it a more balanced, I guess the word I'm looking for is balanced approach?
Understand completely what you're saying. I saw both sides of that. And it was Bob Roop, because I remember Dad loved Bob Roop, and he would always talk about the shooters. He loved shooters. The other guy, Bob, I don't know that names, but I remember Dad.
Sweetan.
Yeah, I don't remember it, but I remember Dad specifically talking about Bob Roop and him being
Roop, the Olympian.
So definitely I would think you have that part of that one. To go back, yes, when prior to Dad and Nelson Royal's school, I felt they just like they would take turns on guys after, Stallion goes in there and hooks them, and Stallion wasn't brutal on them. You'd get, Ole would go in there sometimes, or you'd, gosh, I can't remember some of the shoot. He had great shooters. They were all like a Bob, they all had some collegiate background. And I just remember thinking, I don't remember any of those guys at the Coliseum ever becoming wrestlers. it did change when Nelson Royal and Dad had the school because they needed students. There were some people that got through that I don't think should have. But, back then, I think the school was $3,000. And like Dad was making, that was a significant income to him. But they got stretched. I mean, if you made it through that, you can ask any of these guys I just said. One of my good friends to this day is Joe Cruz, and he's still mad at me when he was 22 and I was 16 and I stretched the shit out of him. He couldn't, like, in his prime, in my prime, he probably could have beat the hell out of me. But when you go through that type of physical workout, you can't do anything or defend yourself. And I just remember, like I told you, it was just, they're like, Breaker's, like, even though they wanted these guys to come in, like, Breaker's nose, sugar, put the sugar on. I was just like, I can't do it. I don't, but so I believe there was a difference between the two times because I did say earlier, it was a show at the Coliseum. Like, you would see top guys show up just to watch these guys get the shit beat out of them. And so part of it is sadistic, in my opinion, but there was also a part of a mentality that I didn't even understand from the 70s and 60s of, this is wrestling. If you can't do it, I mean, you listen to Flair, the Road Warriors, all the, Greg Gagne did the same workouts in Minnesota. The Sheik, all those, they did all this stuff. And they made it, so I guess it's like the badge is like, if you can't do this, then, you can't be a wrestler. So, but I did go back to the point. Part of it, I think, was sadistic. And the other part, it came to a point they would stretch them, but they also needed bodies to make money off of. So,
you may recall a couple of years ago, actually, it was over a decade now. There was a scandal over the training program that Hugh Morris was facilitating for WWE, where there were some alleged mistreatment. There were some, not physically, but some off-color ribs, and some people had their feelings hurt. And we fast forward to today when it seems like wrestlers are on social media all the time, breaking kayfabe, talking about, their mental health problems or whatnot. And no disrespect to any of that, but seeming to be, and I think Taker talked about it a couple of years ago, where he said, even in his, contemporary of yours, in his generation, wrestlers were tougher. And do you think that in this day and age of safe spaces and protecting feelings and that sort of thing, that the product suffers from some not having that old school mentality? Because from what I understand, if you're in the WWE program in Florida and you there's a cross-word exchange, there's a sit down and HR and et cetera, let alone physical brutalization.
Well, that's kind of just the world we live in today. Hopefully it's on the change. I know once anybody in Dad's wrestling school in Nelson's, once they made it through the tryouts, there was no hazing. You weren't one of the boys, but you're one of the boys in wrestling school. So you were treated with respect. You went through this. Everybody, hey, you made it, man, through shit that some people didn't even. I never went through that tryout. I mean, that's nepotism. My dad was Gene Anderson. I walked right in. I don't know if I could have ever done that, but it is, and I can't remember. I love Cornette. He might have been the one that said it recently. He's like, look at the people wrestling today. If you were beside them in a store, you wouldn't know them from anybody else. And I know Vince, I'd heard the statement he had said before is, people aren't going to pay. And this was back in the 80s when he loved the big guys. They're not going to pay to come see the big guy at the gym. They want to see a superhuman. Okay. And I understand wrestling has changed since then, because you can't have the Barbarian doing a flip off the top rope and somebody, whatever it is they do today. So it's a different style. I understand, but I wouldn't, they don't even look athletic. And I'm sorry to say that they don't look like they've played sport. I mean, most of them. And so, as far as it's just a different world with all of that. And I think probably that's the same in everything. I mean, and hopefully again, it's going to change. Just because you're whatever, you say the wrong word. I'm ready for 98% of the people who are moral to not have to say they're sorry to 2% of the people who are having their feelings hurt all the time. So that probably answers that best.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's another salient point that old school fans can't get past, and that's, back in your day, if you were 220 pounds, you were considered undersized, and now you've got individuals like, for example, not to pick on him, I'm sure he's got his fans and whatnot, but Orange Cassidy is a guy that you would walk by, let alone the airport test, the eye test. You'd walk by him, you wouldn't think does not look like an attraction, I guess. And I think you're right, that lends itself to the Barbarian not doing lucha libre moves and etc. But I think that is what that essential difference right there is what again, a lot of the old school fans are turned off by, myself included. But again, we're not the target demographic anymore.
Orange Cassidy, is that the dude that does the gimmick where he keeps his hands in his pocket like taps?
Yeah, I can't stand that. Yeah.
That I would love for him to be in the ring and do that to Kevin Sullivan or God, anybody he wants to, that honestly was I would tune in every now and then for a few minutes when I saw that, and he's doing spots with hands in his pockets. And I'm like, that's what I said earlier about you can't even, it's hard to say. They should just call it, I don't know, physical entertainment and not rest. I don't know what, because it's insulting to who everybody did from back and being in fairs and carnivals to working your way into arenas and building it for these people to have a job. And they're the ones making all the money now. That's great. Somebody's watching it. There's a demographic for it. But that gimmick was what pretty much said, okay, I gave up, between that and then everybody standing there with 5 spots, standing there for 5 minutes waiting for somebody to jump on them. But I agree with you totally. That Orange Cassidy gimmick. Sorry, fans, but if I had to work with him, it would be like the Jacob Bryan thing. Probably he'd be stretched and crying. Again, I'm not a badass. I wouldn't work a match like that. I mean, you're going to get, so yeah, I agree with you.
I think Jim Cornette called it best when he used the term aggressive parkour, and that definitely seems to fit across between ballet and theater. But one of the fans who caught our last interview wanted to get some more memories of yourself being around these two legends that are sadly departed. There you are, a picture that you shared with me with Hawk and Animal, the Road Warriors, Legion of Doom, whatever moniker you want to put on it. Still, no doubt Hall of Famers, argument for the greatest tag team attraction of all time. But I know they took a shine to yourself. Do you have any memories to share about Joe and Hawk?
Yes. I was the biggest Road Warrior mark. I mean, and it's funny because the first time I met him was in Raleigh, and it was the same day my dad put me in the match with that guy earlier that I spoke about that was a Pan American champion or whatever. But we had to give them a ride from the hotel. It was a TV taping. Excuse me. And so I remember I was like, we're going to give the Road Warriors a ride. And I'm like, pissing myself thinking because this is like a movie star, I'd never, and Hawk comes, he had his bandana on. I was thinking they're going to show up in their face paint stuff, but because I'm 14 years old at the time. So we gave him the ride down there. And the picture that you have, there was actually another, I was such a Road Warrior mark. There was another one that was the Great American Bash in '86, I think.
Yeah, you can make it out on your golf shirt there.
And so the prior year, we had a yellow shirt was for 80. That was the first Great American Bash. And so I had Animal. I was, I was 14, 15 years old. and we would ride them out on golf carts. And Dustin Rhodes had Hawk on the back of his. I had Animal, and so I'd never driven an electric golf cart. And so Dustin takes off and stops, and it's not like a car. And I went to hit the brake, but they don't just stop. And so I hit the back of the golf cart that Dustin Rhodes, Gold Dust, is driving with Hawk on the back, who I love. And he about got knocked off. And he's like, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm scared to death. But two other things that stand out. The Hawk, we had some fun times. I remember having a match with Brad Armstrong. I was Agent Steel at the time, and it was my first few months in the business, and nobody could ever have a match with Brad Armstrong and it be bad. He made the worst look great. But we were in Greenville, South Carolina, and I just remember coming back from the obviously I put Brad over. I was coming back, and Hawk standing there at the curtain, and he's like, "Kid, you're a fucking natural." And that was like the biggest compliment to this, honestly, because the dude I've worshiped just told me I'm a natural. One of the funny things, though, me and Bobby Eaton, Italian Stallion, Brad Armstrong, Hawk, Paul Ellering, we were out partying one night, doing things which you did back in the 80s, right? Which meant staying up all night. And so Paul kind of babysat Hawk to a point. He would just have a beer or two, and we're indulging in things. And I'm 18 years old, and I look around. I'm like, I got Bobby Eaton, Hawk, Italian Stallion, Paul Ellering in a hotel room. I'm like, I've made it, man. I've made it. And so we ended up later on that night. It was just me, Brad Armstrong, and Hawk, and we would stay at this Days Inn in Georgia, and had a pool in the middle of the hotel. Like all the doors, opened up. So they were outside doors, and they would open. There would be a pool outside. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning, right? And Hawk's like, I'm going swimming. And I'm like, we're geeked out at this point. He opens the door. He has nothing on but his tidy whities. He jumps in the swim. This is like September or October. It's cold enough, right? So he jumps in the water at 6:30 in the morning, whatever it was. And he comes up and he does the same, and next thing, and Brad's like, shut that fucking door, man. Lock him out there. Because lights are flipping on all over the hotel room. Like, what was that we just heard? Why is there somebody? I mean, obviously, we've all heard the, why are we
rush
at 6 o'clock in the morning in our hotel room? And yeah, he came staggering back in. We all went to bed, and it was fun. But honestly, to this day, when you're standing in the ring and you hear, I am Iron, and you're scared I'm sorry. I knew they were going to take care of me. They never hurt anybody, but you're scared I mean, it's like, is this real? It was surreal. And you're like, is this actually happening right now? Because that's a great, to me, ever say, I was in the ring and I wrestled the Road Warriors.
Well, yeah. Can you, from that perspective, and I know a lot of guys talk about pops, but from a guy who was standing in the ring, hearing those first strains of Iron Man and hearing that crowd, do you think that there ever really in the history of wrestling to this date was a louder, more raucous crowd reaction to an entrance? And what was that like for you? I know you mentioned you're a little bit scared, but were you in awe of that crowd response?
Yeah. Personally, my opinion is that's the biggest pop that I've experienced. And yeah, I don't know what words to put. I wasn't that scary. I don't know. It was overpowering to know that these dudes, man, and I'm standing here and somehow I don't care if they're going to fucking put a squash on me and have me beat with my partner in 10 seconds. But to even be there in that moment, I was like, oh my God, these were the guys. I mean, but to answer your question, me personally, I believe they even call it today the Road Warrior pop. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's a reason for that. And that's what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I caught a couple of shows back in the day for JCP NWA in the crowd as a kid, and it was something to behold. I think even more than Hogan, who I saw a couple times live in Maple Leaf Gardens against Savage, the Road Warriors had him beat there.
One
Sorry,
last
go ahead.
about that is, and you know, back then in the days, back in JCP, WCW, there wasn't barriers. You know, there might have been a rope on, and so you got these guys walking out through the. I mean, that was a whole different experience for the fans. You know, it wasn't like Japan where they're punching people away, but at the same time, the fans are, you know, tapping them on. You were able to interact with your hero, and so pop just meant that much more. Like, I can touch this person. You know, it was an unbelievable time. I mean, I can imagine today people, even whatever the product is, being able to touch their favorite star. I mean, they feel differently, and it is different, but that was a whole different experience. And I apologize for interrupting.
No. I appreciate your insight there. I don't think fans, that weren't around then or saw the product live can understand what it was like when kayfabe was still in existence to see. And I believe the match I saw in the arena was the Road Warriors against I think it was either Tully and Arn, or Flair was involved in there. It was a main event. The absolute these individuals were larger than life, and fans don't understand how much of a cultural touch point, especially in the territories in the South, pro wrestling was.
I agree totally. It was, again, I say it's just not comparable with what's going on today, with what you felt back then. I mean, I believe people go to be entertained today. I mean, it's an impressive show. You got fireworks and all, but fans back in the day were connected with their, I mean, and you could touch them, or it was just a different era. And I feel there was much more of a connection. I don't even know what a heel and a baby face is anymore. It's just like who does the quickest spot and gets the biggest pop. I don't, you know.
All gray, it seems. One of our very well-educated fans of the channel, Ibzan, is asking, did you ever take advice from Terry Funk?
Unfortunately, no. I had very minimal contact with Funk. The first time, honestly, I was around him at WCW. I probably never even met him. Like, it was just a passing. And it was when he came back and did the gimmick after Flair and Steamboat had worked. And then he kind of came in, and I can't remember exactly. I think he fucked Flair or whatever, and they built it up but that was the first times I was around him. And, he just didn't, I don't know, it might have been, he didn't seem approachable. So I kind of stayed away. A lot of the guys that I remember Dad talking about, I would go up to him. It was kind of a kiss ass thing, you know, like, hey, I've never met you before. I'm Gene Anderson's son. Or some of the guys I had met when I was younger, that was the ones that would usually pop. Like, oh yeah, kid, how you know, whatever. But I never did go up to Terry, so I never got any advice. I never even remember meeting him. So, except walking by him in the hallways.
One of the fans on social media saw the picture of the legendary Anderson family that was on the header for this interview, and wanted to know about your interactions and relationship with Arn Anderson, Marty Lund. Lundy.
Yes, no, I'm laughing just because I honestly, I think Arn's kind of a dick. He could have done a lot. I don't expect anything, but you know, I think Arn would have been successful regardless at some point, because of his ability. But to walk in to being an Anderson after the reason was because my dad got hurt and couldn't wrestle anymore. I don't think he owed me anything, but he was just, I don't know. At first he's like, oh, he spoke. And then I think he got to the point where, like, I'm bigger than where, I don't know if I'm saying that right. He seemed bigger than the role he got he ran with it. I'm the Arn's one of the best workers ever, but there would never be an Arn Anderson if there wasn't a Gene and Lars and an Ole Anderson. And I look at it as like, had I been any one of those three, I would have nurtured Arn's kid. I would have, hey, kid, you're going to be the one eventually. Maybe he saw that I couldn't do it. That might be the truth. I don't know. But he never even tried to, the question you asked about Terry Funk, he never tried to mentor me, talk to me. The only thing he ever did was when I went to Portland, and it was because my dad asked him to. Flair and Arn, I was heading to Portland. They did an interview. I wish I had it. I don't think to save stuff like this, but we did an interview at WCW, and they sent it to Pacific Northwest. Like, hey, Brad Anderson's coming here, blah, blah, blah. That was the only thing he ever did to me. And he acted like he had an attitude, kind of like, I don't know. It maybe, and it was probably me. I don't know. But I just say again, if I was Arn or anybody put in that position, I would like, hey, this is our future. It might not be great, but this is what we got. Because Arn had a kid coming up down the road too. And maybe had I done better myself, that his kid could have had a better shot too, because there was a gap between Arn Anderson and whatever his son's name, I apologize, that came into the business, who it doesn't seem like it's working out very well. But yeah, my opinion at times, he seems, and I hate to say ungrateful, maybe, to a point, because I think he could have done a lot more. And then again, maybe he just looked at me like, this kid ain't got a chance. I don't know.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, because I remember thinking back in the day, as a fan, when you came on the scene, and being a fan of the Wrecking Crew, and your dad being gone, and Ole being inactive, etc., that this is a no-brainer. This is a layup that Brad and Arn are going to be the Wrecking Crew again, and then it never happened, and really didn't make sense to me. But that's more of the politics of the wrestling business. And we're almost through the hour, Brad. I want to have you back, because the fans in Europe and from our other interview are very interested in a deep dive in terms of your WCW, and also Portland is experiencing a resurgence. So I'd like to have you back to go into detail in that regard. But before we do, I want to squeeze in your reflection, given the fact that I'm a Canadian and a Stampede fan from back in the day. I know you had a tenure there, albeit brief, and have some interesting anecdotes to share. If you could do that.
Yes. Yeah. Fast, because I could spend the whole next hour talking about that place, even though I was there for 4 weeks, because it was one of the last outposts of professional wrestling. But yeah, my first night there in Calgary was TV on a Friday night, and I'd always heard the horror stories about Stu, stretching guys, and we're talking 88, so he wasn't, he's old at this point, but I still heard about him wanting to stretch guys. And so I had come out of the locker room, and I might have talked about this in our previous interview, but it's still there so much. I see Stu, he's walking over to me, and he's got something in his hand. I realize it's a picture, and I'm like, what the fuck? I'm scared to death, man. I'm 18 years old, my first territory. I'm 3,000 miles from home, scared. I was homesick. And here comes Stu Hart with, I don't know, he's like, yes. He's like, hey, kid. And he has a picture in his hand. He's like, yeah, I heard. And it turned around. It was a picture of Nelson Royal. I guess he didn't have a picture of my dad, but he's like, I heard Nelson change you, kid. And I'm like, yes, sir. And he's like, yeah, and your mom's a Calgary girl. And I'm ready to shit my pants. I'm like, again, it's almost like the Road Warriors moment. This is an icon in the business. And is he going to fucking leg dive me now next? I don't know, because I've heard horror stories. Usually it's in the dungeon, but no, he was super great to me. That was a very learning territory. Rip Rogers taught me a lot there. And even though he was a heel, we kind of kayfabe. He taught me a lot, and he smartened me up to how to be in a territory and make nothing and survive. But I loved it. I wish I could have been there longer. but it just didn't work out. I was too young to begin with all the other things that had gone on. But what a great territory.
Did you, during your time there, did you meet any of the talents that stood out? Isban again is asking if, I think the timeline adds up, but did you ever meet Owen or witness any of his ribs?
No, both Brett, Owen, I think Owen had left a couple months prior. Johnny Smith was there. I don't know if he was from England, obviously. I don't
British Bruiser. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how, but, so he was there. But they kept on talking about how Johnny and Davey were coming back because it wasn't working out in New York for them, and the territory was going to pop again. So I never was able to meet them. And again, though, if you weren't a babyface then, it was really hard. The only way I got to talk to Rip Rogers is I knew where his hotel was, and he let me stay sleep on his couch. The rest of it was, you had the kayfabe heel vans, you had to get the babyface vans, and you didn't go, it was back in the day, you interact with each other. But it was crazy. I real funny, quick story. And I'm from the South, and I know I have an accent. My mom is from Calgary, but I didn't quite understand things. And I remember we'd go into restaurants, whatever, and the dudes were always the boys were putting food in, like crackers in their pockets. And I was like, what are y'all doing? Like, well, we're going to end up in a ditch one night because of how cold it is and it's frozen, and it's better to have food than not, and be hungry. So I was like, oh, okay. So, but we're driving all the time, and I finally start driving. They're like, let the young kid drive. He's, and they kept on saying, what I heard was, watch out for the black guys. Okay. We're in the middle of the country, and I'm like, there's no black people up here. I don't understand. What they were saying is, watch out for the black ice. But Canadian accent from the Western part is, watch out for the black guys. And I'm like, why? Like, I'm from the South. I mean, there was prejudice back then, and it still is, but like, I don't even see black people up here. Why are y'all worried about the black guys? And the whole thing was, they were saying black ice. And I was like, okay, there's another 18-year-old. I didn't know no better, but I still laugh at that to this day.
Well, yeah, they say that, and Canadians definitely in the West and the East certainly have accents. They say that I do sometimes, and I don't really get it. But did you meet, because you're a baby face there? Were you there when Benoit was there, or had he departed by then?
No, because Benoit and his partner then was Beef Wellington.
Beef Wellington,
and,
yeah,
they were the top. They were one of the top tag teams. I think they worked the Cuban Assassins back then. Jerry
Morrow.
Yes. And I can't remember who the other one of those, but Jerry, I met him there, and I did not realize how much of an icon he was he'd been around forever. He pissed the boys off just being funny all the time, but I did meet him. But yes, Benoit actually was one of the few people that, actually he and Bruce Hart would come to me, and they mentored me there. Benoit, like, he would come out of nowhere, and just like, it's still so hard to this day after spending time with him there. And then he came to WCW, understanding what happened. I don't know what to think about that. But Benoit's first match in WCW, they put him with me. No
way, I didn't know that.
Well, it never happened. We were in Gainesville, Georgia, and they had started the show. It was a TV taping for WCW. And Vader, something happened. He went back in the back and ripped the fucking toilet off of the wall. So you got water shooting out, and you got all these electrical cables for television going on. Me and Benoit, we had already, we're going to have the good, we been around each other a little bit. We're going to have a great match. Well, yeah, Vader rips the toilet off the wall. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this, but it's the truth. So the entire TV taping got canceled. I don't know, 20 minutes in or something like that. So that match never happened. I don't think I ever worked with him after that. But I would always I'm sorry, I can't put one and one together to make two with that story, because I think the Benoit I knew was a wonderful helping person. Don't know what happened.
Yeah, and a lot of people said that. Why? Just out of curiosity, as an aside, why in the world did Vader rip the toilet out of the wall?
I don't remember what happened. I don't remember why, but that was back when Vader would just, because he was big and he would, this was his early days of coming there. And I guess before Paul stretched him, Paul Orndorff, I guess, I don't, but it was funny at times, because it was funny earlier that day. I heard him say, like, he's sitting on this, the bleachers would pull out there and someone did something. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. My apologies. And I was like, that's a great word to, like, when you say my apologies. I was like, I'm sorry, whatever. But the way he said it, like, you're 400 and some pounds. And then an hour or two later, he's back there ripping a urinal off of the wall. I don't know what happened. It was obviously, it happened on TV as a fuck spot or something like that, from what I remember, but I don't remember exactly. But yeah, you had water shooting all over. They had to shut everything off. And yeah, it was the Georgia Mountain Center in Gainesville, Georgia.
Wow, that's wild. I guess Orndorff wasn't the first to beat somebody up wearing flip flops. It was your dad.
Yeah, right. For a wrestling tryout.
That's tremendous, Brad. This has been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I'd like to do another interview this time. Addressing the fan demand, to go into detail about WCW, and we'll also fit some Portland in there too, because I'm a fan of that territory as well, and I really enjoy listening to your recollections of your time in the business.
Well, thank you. It's like ecstatic feeling, like when I won't be able to probably sleep for I don't know how many hours, because I love talking about the business, and it's more exciting. And I'm not trying to like shoot a promo right now, that this is going to go out into people in Europe who I never even thought would know what we did here back in that day. So, hey guys, I really appreciate you. It's wonderful that people still care about what was important to us back then and what we're doing. So thank you very much for having me. I'll be glad to come back anytime.
Where can the folks find you on social media, sir?
I don't really do that. I kind of, the last, I have a Facebook page. They can look me up under Bradley Anderson. I had an old one under Brad Anderson. I can't remember the password or get through to it, but it would be Bradley Anderson. If they want to send me a friend request there, that's fine. I don't post much. It's just like, I feel like whatever I did's gone, and I don't know. And not to mention the trolls. I had a few trolls after our last interview, and I was like, man, I don't know if I'm ready for this anymore. One guy making fun of my mom for dying when I post. It's just like, so I'm on Facebook under Bradley Anderson. You can friend me. Please be nice, because I want to be nice back to you. So people are just nasty at times.
Yeah, there's closing on an old school axiom here. There's a lot of folks that are, and I believe Tyson said it a couple of years ago, there's a lot of folks that are pretty tough on the keyboard, but they would not say anything to your face, and some of them do actually need some correction that way. So I think by far, though, the fans, the old school fans that watch Cheap Heat Productions and the Hannibal TV, very respectful and knowledgeable, and certainly all the feedback I got on our first interview, and this one will be no different, was entirely positive. So I want to thank you again for coming on, and we'll certainly keep in touch to do another on WCW in Portland.
Absolutely. Great talk. Look forward to it.
Well, fans, that's it for this live edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Pro Wrestling Podcast. Very enjoyable, always, with Mr. Brad Anderson. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the notifications button, and you'll keep on top of all the live content and other content that we have coming for you. But until then, I'm Jack Kilby. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much for watching this video. Please subscribe to the channel if at all possible. It would really help me out. And don't forget, you can check out my back catalog of videos recorded